Before we begin, drop a comment below with your country and what time it is right now where you're watching, whether it's sunrise in Nairobi, midnight in New York, afternoon in Canada, or evening in France. I want to know. Don't just sit back. Tell me where in the world you are. Now, let's dive into the story. Chapter 1. The proposal that broke me. I stood in my kitchen, gripping the counter so hard my knuckles went white, staring at the man kneeling in front of me like he'd lost his whole mind. Darius had just asked me to marry him. Not just any man, my ex-husband's younger brother, the same brother who'd been coming around for the past year, fixing things around my house, making my grandbabies laughing, looking at me like I was still worth something after everything I'd been through. But all I could think about was what people would say, what Ronald's mama would say, what my church sister would whisper behind their fancy hats on Sunday morning. I'm 58 years old, got 4 grandbabies I'm raising by myself, and I ain't got the energy for no more drama. But here was Darius, holding a simple gold band, his brown eyes full of something I hadn't seen in 20 years, real love. And all I could do was shake my head and say, "Baby, I can't." Darius had been practicing that speech, I could tell. He told me he'd loved me since the day Ronald brought me to that first family barbecue back in 1987. Said he watched me raise my kids, watched me survive Ronald's mess, watched me taking my daughter's babies when she couldn't get herself together. He said he didn't care that I was older than him by 3 years, didn't care what his family thought, didn't care about nothing but me. I felt tears burn in my eyes because Lord knows I wanted to believe him. But that voice in my head, the one that sounds like my mama, like the church mothers, like every woman who ever told me to know my place, that voice was screaming that I was too old for this, too tired, too broken. I pulled my hand away from his and whispered, "I'm sorry, Darius, I just can't do this." The look on his face almost killed me, but he stood up slow, brushed off his jeans, and nodded like he'd been expecting it all along. He didn't beg, didn't argue, just looked at me with the eyes that made me feel seen for the first time in forever and said, "I ain't going nowhere, Vivian, not unless you tell me to leave and mean it." Then he walked out my front door, and I was alone with the hum of my old refrigerator and the weight of a choice I didn't know how to make. My phone buzzed on the counter, a text from Ronald. "Heard Darius been sniffing around. You better not embarrass this family." I stared at that message until my screen went black, seeing my reflection looking back at me. Embarrass the family? This family had already embarrassed me more times than I could count. But here I was, still worried about what they thought, still trying to be the good woman who never caused trouble, who never put herself first. The grandbabies were at my sister's house for the weekend. Little Jayla, Marcus, Kendra, and baby TJ. That meant I had nothing but time to sit here and lose my mind. I poured myself some sweet tea and sat on my back porch, watching the Memphis sun go down over my neighbor's fence. The jasmine I planted last spring was blooming, filling the air with that heavy sweetness that makes you think about all the things you used to dream about before life got hard. I thought about Ronald, about how he used to kiss my forehead before work, about how he stopped touching me altogether after I gained weight following the twins. I thought about Darius, about how he looked at me when I talked like every word was important. I thought about that ring sitting on my coffee table, catching the last bit of sunlight. And I thought about what it would mean to say yes, to choose love over fear, to choose myself over everybody else's opinions. My phone rang, making me jump. It was my best friend Sharon calling from across town. I answered on the 3rd ring, my voice shaky. Sharon didn't waste no time. "Girl, I heard about what happened, and before you say anything, let me tell you something. Ronald don't get to control your life no more. He left you for a woman half your age. You don't owe him nothing." I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. But the words didn't really sink in because deep down, I wasn't scared of Ronald. I was scared of myself. Scared that if I let Darius in, if I let myself love again, I'd lose him too. and I didn't think I could survive another heartbreak at my age. Sharon's voice got softer. You don't have to decide today, Viv, but don't say no just because you're scared. You deserve to be happy. The line went quiet, and I whispered, what if I'm too old? What if I'm not enough? Sharon's answer came quick. What if you are? Chapter 2, how it all started. I met Ronald Jackson in 1985 at a fish fry in South Memphis back when I was 23 and still believed that being a good woman was enough to keep a man. He was 28 working at the FedEx warehouse, and he had that confident swagger that made all the girls turn their heads. I was working as a nursing assistant at Baptist Hospital, taking night classes to get my LPN and trying to help my mama with my younger siblings. Ronald bought my plate that night, told me I had the prettiest smile he'd ever seen, and asked if he could take me to church that Sunday. We got married at Beale Street Baptist Church 6 months later, and I thought I had found my forever. Darius was his best man. Quiet, 20 years old, and so shy he barely said 2 words to me the whole reception. But I remember thinking he had kind eyes. Back then, Darius was just Ronald's baby brother, always hanging around the edges of family gatherings like he wasn't sure he belonged. He worked construction, lived in a little apartment in Fraser, and never had much to say unless you asked him directly. But I liked him right away because he wasn't trying to prove nothing to nobody. When Ronald and I moved into our first house in Whitehaven, Darius helped us move every single box without complaining. He fixed our leaky toilet, helped Ronald build a fence in the backyard, and showed up at my baby shower with the biggest teddy bear I'd ever seen. When the day I brought my twins home from the hospital, Keisha and Kevin, Darius stayed late to help me figure out the double stroller while Ronald went to play dominoes with his boys. We talked about everything that night. My dreams of becoming a nurse, his plans to start his own construction company, how crazy Memphis traffic was getting. And when he made me laugh about something silly, he looked at me like I'd just given him the best gift in the world. The first crack in my marriage came when the twins were about 5 years old. I was working double shifts at the hospital, trying to save money so I could finish my nursing degree, and Ronald had started staying out later and later. He said he was working overtime, building our future, but he stopped asking about my day. He stopped holding my hand at church. He stopped seeing me at all. One night, I found a receipt in his jacket pocket. Dinner for 2 at a restaurant we'd never been to. When I asked him about it, he looked me dead in my face and said, "Vivian, you always tired. Will you let yourself go? What you expect me to do?" I wanted to scream, wanted to throw that receipt in his face, wanted to make him feel how bad he was breaking my heart. But I just put it back in his pocket and told myself it was a phase, that marriage was hard, that I had to try harder to keep him happy. Darius noticed something was wrong before anybody else did. He came by one Saturday to help Ronald fix the garage door, but Ronald wasn't home. I was in the kitchen trying to keep it together while the twins played in the living room, and Darius just looked at me and asked, "You all right, Vivian?" I lied and said I was fine, but my voice cracked and suddenly I was crying the way you cry when you've been holding it in too long. Darius didn't say nothing. He just pulled out a chair at my kitchen table, sat down, and let me fall apart. When I finally stopped crying, he handed me a napkin and said, "You don't have to pretend with me." It was the first time in months that somebody had given me permission to be human. After that day, something shifted between us. Nothing inappropriate, just an understanding that we saw each other in a way other people didn't. 20 years went by like that. I raised Keisha and Kevin, watched Ronald become a stranger in our house, and learned how to survive on my own, even though I was still married. Darius started his construction business, built it from the ground up, and never missed a birthday, a graduation, or a crisis. When my daughter Keisha got pregnant at 17, Darius helped me turn the spare room into a nursery. When she had her second baby 2 years later and started running the streets, Darius was there helping me figure out how to raise grandbabies at 50. When Keisha got locked up for drug possession and Kevin moved to Atlanta for a job, Darius became the only man in my life who showed up consistently. And somewhere in all those years, I started to notice things I shouldn't have noticed. The way his voice sounded on the phone, the way he remembered how I took my coffee, the way he looked at me when he thought I wasn't paying attention. But I buried those feelings deep because he was Ronald's brother, and I was still trying to be the kind of woman who did the right thing. Chapter 3, the divorce that changed everything. I filed for divorce on a Tuesday morning in January 2023. 2 weeks after I walked in on Ronald with a woman young enough to be his daughter. I'd left my shift at the nursing home early because little Jayla had a fever and the house was supposed to be empty. Instead, I walked into my bedroom and saw my husband of 38 years with some girl who looked about 25 in the bed I'd been sleeping in since 1985. Ronald didn't even look ashamed. He just stared at me like I was interrupting his good time. I didn't scream, didn't cry. I just turned around, got Jayla from my sister's house, packed 3 suitcases, and moved into the rental house my cousin owned in Hickory Hill. The only person I called that night was Darius, and had showed up at my door within 30 minutes, a toolbox in one hand and chicken from Gus's in the other, not saying a word because he already knew. The divorce was uglier than I expected because Ronald hired a lawyer who tried to make me look bad. They said I was too focused on my grandbabies, that I let myself go, that I wasn't a good wife. He fought me on the house, on my pension, on everything he could use to make me feel small. His mama, Miss Dorothy, called me selfish, said I should forgive him the way a good Christian woman does. Even some of my church sisters gave me that sad look, like I was throwing away my marriage over one mistake. But that one mistake had been happening for years. I just finally caught him. I sat in that courtroom for 8 months, watching Ronald twist the truth until I didn't recognize myself. But Darius sat in the back row every single time. And when the judge finally gave me the house and half of Ronald's pension, Darius was the first person I looked for. He just gave me that small nod, and I knew he'd been holding me up the whole time. The hardest part wasn't the divorce. It was the loneliness that came after. I'd spent 38 years being Mrs. Ronald Jackson, and now I was just Vivian Turner again, trying to remember who that woman even was. I'd wake up at 3 in the morning in that rental house, listening to the grandbabies breathing in the next room, wondering how I ended up raising kids again at my age. My friends from church didn't know what to say to me. Half of them were still married, and they looked at me like divorce was contagious. Sharon was the only one who understood, who called me every night and let me cry without trying to fix it. But even Sharon lived on the other side of town, and what I really needed was somebody who could show up in real life. That somebody ended up being Darius. He started coming by every weekend to help with the house, fixing the water heater, mowing the lawn, teaching Marcus how to ride his bike without training wheels. He never asked for nothing in return. At first, I told myself he was just being a good uncle, that this was just family helping family. But I couldn't ignore what was happening, so I started looking forward to Saturday mornings in a way that made me feel guilty. I'd put on a little lipstick before he came over, laugh too loud at his jokes, find reasons to stand close to him when we talked. And Darius wasn't innocent either. I caught him looking at me when he thought I wasn't paying attention, heard how his voice got softer when he said my name, noticed how he'd touch my hand or my shoulder like he was testing something. One evening, after the grandbabies were asleep, we were sitting on my porch drinking sweet tea, and he said something that stopped my heart. "Vivian, I need to tell you something I should have said a long time ago. I've been in love with you since the day Ronald brought you home. Watching him hurt you all these years has been the hardest thing I ever had to do." I sat there in the Memphis heat, listening to the cicadas and the sound of my heart breaking open, and I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to tell him to leave, to stop saying things that made me feel like I was betraying Ronald all over again, even though Ronald had betrayed me first. But another part of me The part that had been starving for somebody to see me, to choose me, to love me the way I deserved, wanted to lean into him and never let go. Instead, I just sat there frozen and finally whispered, "Why are you telling me this now, Darius?" He looked at me with those brown eyes that had always been too kind and said, "Because you're free now, Vivian. And I don't want to spend the rest of my life wondering what could have been if I just had the courage to tell you." The air between us felt electric and dangerous, and I stood up quick, told him it was getting late, and watched him drive away. But I didn't sleep that night. I just laid there staring at my ceiling fan, replaying his words, wondering if a woman my age was allowed to feel like this again. Chapter 4, The Weight of Judgment. The first time Ronald found out about Darius spending time at my house, he showed up unannounced on a Sunday afternoon, banging on my door like the police. I was in the kitchen making Sunday dinner with Jayla and Kendra helping me peel potatoes, and Darius was in the backyard fixing the fence that had fallen down during that bad storm we had. I opened the door, and there was Ronald, his face tight with anger, looking like he wanted to start World War III. He pushed past me without asking, his eyes scanning my house like he still had rights to it. When he saw Darius through the kitchen window, his whole face twisted up. "So this what you doing now?" he said loud enough for the grandbabies to hear. "Messing with my brother? You really that desperate, Vivian?" I felt my blood pressure rising, but I kept my voice steady. "You don't get to come in here judging me, Ronald, not after what you did." Ronald laughed, but it wasn't a real laugh. It was bitter and mean, the sound of a man who thought he was still the victim. "I made a mistake, Vivian, but at least I didn't go sleeping with family. You out here making me look like a fool. My own brother. That's nasty. That's disrespectful to everything we built." I crossed my arms over my chest, my nails digging into my skin to keep from shaking. "We ain't sleeping together, Ronald. He been helping me because you left me to figure everything out by myself. But even if we were together, it wouldn't be none of your business anymore. You gave up that right when you brought that girl into our bed." Ronald's jaw clenched, and for a second I thought he might actually put his hands on me. But then Darius walked through the back door, and his presence filled up the whole room like a wall between me and Ronald's anger. Darius didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. He just looked at Ronald and said, "You need to leave, man." Ronald turned on him, his face red, his hands balled up in fists. "You really gonna stand there and defend her? After everything I did for you? I gave you your first construction job. I let you stay with us when you ain't have nowhere to go. And this is how you repay me?" Darius's jaw tightened, but his voice stayed calm. "You didn't do none of that for me, Ronald. You did it so you could hold it over my head, and I'm done pretending like I owe you something. Vivian been through hell, and if you cared about her even a little bit, you'd leave her alone." The tension in my kitchen was suffocating. I could hear little Jayla and Kendra whispering in the hallway, scared. I stepped between my ex-husband and the man I was trying not to love, my voice firm. "Both of y'all need to calm down. Ronald, get out of my house, and don't come back unless it's to see your grandbabies." Ronald stared at me like he didn't know who I was anymore, and maybe he didn't. The Vivian he knew would have backed down, would have apologized for things that wasn't her fault, would have made herself small to keep the peace. But that woman was gone. This Vivian had learned how to stand up, how to say no, how to protect herself and her grandbabies from men who didn't deserve them. Ronald shook his head, said something under his breath about family loyalty being dead, and stormed out, slamming my screen door so hard the whole house shook. The silence after he left was thick and heavy. I could feel Darius watching me, waiting for me to fall apart, but I didn't. I just took a deep breath, turned to my grandbabies, and made my voice cheerful. "Y'all ready to finish these potatoes?" Jayla came running back to the kitchen, but little Marcus stayed in the hallway. his eyes big and worried in a way that broke my heart. After I got the grandbabies settled down with cartoons, Darius pulled me aside in the laundry room, his hand gentle on my arm. "You okay, Vivian?" he asked, and the concern in his voice almost broke me. I nodded, but the tears came anyway, hot and fast and full of everything I'd been holding in for months. Darius didn't hesitate. He pulled me into his chest, his arms wrapping around me strong and sure, and I let myself cry in a way I hadn't since the divorce. I cried for the 38 years I wasted on Ronald, for the grandbabies who had to grow up around all this mess, for the church sisters who looked at me sideways now. And I cried because Darius was holding me like I mattered, like I was worth fighting for, and I wasn't sure I deserved that. When I finally pulled back, my face wet and swollen, he cut my cheek and said, "You deserve better than this, Vivian. You always have." And for the first time in my whole life, I almost believed him. Chapter 5, Learning to Live Again. The weeks after Ronald's explosion were different. I felt like I was walking on eggshells, trying to balance being a grandmother, a nurse, and a woman who was slowly realizing she had feelings for a man she had no business wanting. Darius still came by every weekend, but now there was something electric in the air between us that we couldn't ignore. He brushed past me in my narrow kitchen, and I'd feel it all the way down to my bones. I'd laugh at one of his dry jokes, and he'd look at me like I was the only woman in the world. It was terrifying and beautiful all at once, and I didn't know how to handle it. I'd spent so many years being Ronald's wife, being Keisha's mama, being these babies' grandmother, that I'd forgotten how to just be Vivian. But with Darius, I was starting to remember who that woman was underneath all the roles I'd been playing. One Saturday, Darius took all 4 grandbabies to the park to give me a few hours to myself. I used that time to take a long bath with Epsom salt for my aching joints, paint my toenails the color of red wine, and sit on my porch reading one of those romance novels Sharon kept trying to get me to read. When they came back, the kids were covered in grass stains and melted popsicle, and Darius was carrying little TJ on his shoulders while Marcus and Jayla held his hands. Watching them together did something to my heart, made it ache in a way that was both painful and sweet. Kendra ran up to me, her braids flying everywhere, and said, "Grandma, Mr. Darius said he's going to build us a playhouse in the backyard. Can he, please?" I looked at Darius, who just shrugged with that shy smile, and I felt something inside me shift. This wasn't just attraction. This was something deeper, something that scared me more than anything Ronald ever did. That night, after I got all the babies down, Jayla and Kendra in one room, Marcus and TJ in the other, Darius stayed to help me clean up the kitchen. We worked in comfortable silence, him washing dishes while I dried and put them away, moving around each other like we'd been doing this for years. When we finished, we sat on my back porch with glasses of sweet tea, the Memphis summer air thick and heavy around us. We talked about everything, his childhood growing up in South Memphis, my nursing school days, the things we regretted and the things we were proud of. And then Darius asked me a question that made my stomach flip. "Vivian, if things were different, if Ronald wasn't in the picture at all, would you give me a chance?" My breath caught in my throat. I wanted to say yes so bad it hurt, but the fear was louder than my want. "Darius, I can't," I whispered, my hands shaking around my glass. "People already talking about me. Your family thinks I'm a homewrecker. Miss Dorothy told half the church I seduced you. And what if we mess this up? What if I lose you too?" "I'm 58 years old, baby. I'm too old to be starting over again." Darius reached over and took my hand, his thumb rubbing circles on my skin in a way that made me want to cry. "You won't lose me, Vivian. I ain't going nowhere. And you ain't too old for nothing. You still got life to live, joy to experience. But I need you to know I'm not asking you to choose me right now. I'm just asking you to think about it, to let yourself imagine what it could be like if you stopped being scared." His words settled into my chest like a truth I'd been running from, and I didn't know what to say. So I just sat there holding his hand under the Memphis stars, letting myself imagine for the first time what loving him might feel like. The next morning, I woke up to a text from Sharon. "Girl, when you gonna stop running from your blessing?" I stared at that message for a long time, my heart pounding. Sharon was right. I'd been running from Darius, from my feelings, from the possibility of something real. I've been so focused on not making another mistake that I'd forgotten what it felt like to take a risk on something good. Later that day, I called Sharon and told her everything about the proposal I turned down, about Ronald's threats, about the way Darius looked at me like I hung the moon. Sharon listened without interrupting, and when I finished, she said, "Viv, you spent your whole life putting everybody else first. When you gonna choose yourself?" That question hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. I didn't have an answer, not yet, but I was starting to realize that maybe it was time to stop being scared and start being brave. Chapter 6. When family turns against you, my sister Lorraine showed up at my house on a Sunday afternoon without calling. A sweet potato pie in one hand and judgment written all over her face. I was folding laundry in my living room when she walked in, her church shoes clicking on my hardwood floor, her lips pressed together in that way that meant she had something to say and wasn't going to hold back. "We need to talk, Vivian," she said, setting that pie down on my coffee table harder than necessary. I sighed, already knowing what this was about. "Lorraine, if this is about Darius, I don't want to hear it." She crossed her arms, her gold cross necklace catching the light. "Too bad. The whole family's talking. Do you know how it looks? You cozying up to Ronald's baby brother? It looks desperate, Vivian. It looks messy, and these grandbabies don't need to grow up thinking that kind of thing is normal." I felt my face get hot, anger bubbling up in my chest. What looks messy is Ronald cheating on me for years and everybody acting like it didn't happen. What looks desperate is me staying in a marriage that was killing me slowly. Darius has been nothing but good to me in these babies, and I'm not gonna apologize for that, Lorraine. Not to you, not to nobody. My sister shook her head, her face softening just a little bit. "Vivian, I'm not saying Darius is a bad man. I'm saying people gonna talk. Miss Dorothy already telling everybody at Greater Faith Baptist that you seduced him, that you trying to tear the Jackson brothers apart. Is that what you want?" My throat got tight, but I refused to cry. I'd cried enough over the opinions of people who never lifted a finger to help me when Ronald was putting me through hell. I don't care what Miss Dorothy thinks, and I don't care what anybody else thinks either. I'm tired of living my life based on what people might say. Lorraine sat down on my couch, her shoulders sagging under the weight of her own worries. She's always been the one who cared too much about what people thought, who made herself smaller to fit in. I just don't want you to get hurt again, sister. Darius is a good man, but he's still Ronald's brother. What if it don't work out? What if you end up losing both of them? I sat down beside her, my voice quieter now, but still firm. What if it does work out, Lorraine? What if I finally get to be happy after all these years? Ain't that worth the risk? She looked at me for a long moment, her eyes searching my face for something she couldn't name. Then she reached over and squeezed my hand. "Just be careful, Vivian. Happiness is a beautiful thing, but it's fragile. Don't let nobody break you again." I nodded, too choked up to speak. I wanted to tell her I was already broken, that Darius wasn't the one who shattered me. Ronald did, but I didn't. I just held her hand and let the silence say what my mouth couldn't. Later that week, I ran into Miss Dorothy at the Kroger on Poplar Avenue. It was the kind of awkward encounter you can't escape, standing in the cereal aisle with your ex-mother-in-law staring you down like you committed murder. Miss Dorothy didn't bother with small talk. "I heard you've been letting Darius come around your house," she said, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. I gripped my shopping cart, trying to keep my blood pressure from shooting through the roof. "Miss Dorothy, Darius is a grown man. He can spend time wherever he wants." Her eyes narrowed, her mouth twisting into something mean. "You've always been selfish, Vivian. You broke my son's heart walking out on that marriage, and now you trying to ruin Darius too. That boy deserves better than a woman with all your baggage. A woman your age should know better. The words hit me like a slap, and for a second I couldn't breathe, but then something inside me snapped, and I stepped closer to her, my voice low and steady. Your son broke my heart first when he brought another woman into our bed. And if Darius thinks I'm worth his time, that's between him and me, not you, Miss Dorothy. Her face turned red, her hands trembling with rage. You're gonna regret this, Vivian. Mark my words. I didn't flinch. I just turned my cart around and walked away. My head held high, even though my hands were shaking so bad I could barely push that cart. When I got to my car, I sat in the driver's seat for a good 10 minutes. My heart pounded, my mind racing. I thought about calling Darius, but I didn't know what I'd say. How does you tell somebody that their family thinks you're poison? How do you explain that loving them feels like stepping into a battlefield? But when I got home, Darius was already there, sitting on my front steps with a bag of barbecue from Payne's and a worried look on his face. My mama called me, he said as I walked up. I'm sorry, Vivian. I'm so sorry for all of it. I sat down beside him, exhaustion settling deep in my bone. It ain't your fault, Darius, but this is hard, and I don't know if I got the strength to keep fighting at my age. Chapter 7. The moment. Everything changed. I spent the next 2 weeks moving through my life like I was underwater, going to work at the nursing home, getting the grandbabies to school, cooking dinner, giving baths, reading bedtime stories. But my mind was somewhere else, churning with doubt and fear. I kept hearing Miss Dorothy's voice, Ronald's threats, Lorraine's warnings. Everybody had something to say about what I should do, but nobody seemed to care about what I actually wanted. Darius gave me space, only texting every few days to check on me and the babies, never pushing, never demanding, and somehow that made it worse because the space he gave me only made me realize how much I missed him. I missed the way he made my coffee without asking how I liked it. I missed the way he made my grandbabies laugh. I missed the way he looked at me like I was still a woman worth wanting, not just a tired grandmother trying to survive. And one night after I put all 4 babies to bed, I sat on my bedroom floor and finally admitted the truth. I loved him. The realization didn't come with fireworks. It came with fear so deep, it made my chest hurt. Because loving Darius meant choosing myself over everybody else's expectations. It meant risking my reputation, my relationship with Ronald's family, maybe even some of my own family. But it also meant choosing a life where I wasn't settling anymore, where I wasn't making myself small, where I wasn't pretending to be less than I was just to make other people comfortable. I picked up my phone with shaking hands and called Sharon. I think I'm in love with him, I whispered, my voice cracking. Sharon didn't miss a beat. Then stop thinking and start doing, Vivian. Life is too short to live for other people. You 58 years old, you don't know how much time you got left. Stop wasting it being scared. You deserve to be loved by somebody who sees you. Those words settled into my heart like something I'd been waiting my whole life to hear. The next day I called Darius and asked him to come over after the grandbabies went to sleep. He showed up at 9 o'clock, his hair still damp from a shower, his eyes careful like he was afraid I was about to break his heart again. We sat on my couch with the TV playing some show neither one of us was watching, and I could feel my heart hammering so hard I thought he might hear it. I've been thinking, I started, my voice barely above a whisper. About what you said. About us. Darius leaned forward, his hands clasped between his knees, his eyes locked on mine. And I took a shaky breath, my hands twisting in my lap. I'm scared, Darius. I'm scared of what people gonna say. I'm scared of losing you. I'm scared of messing this up and hurting these babies. But I'm more scared of spending the rest of my life wondering what could have been. So if you still want me, if you still mean what you said, then my answer is yes. The look on Darius's face was something I knew I'd remember until the day I died. It wasn't just relief or happiness. It was hope, raw and real and beautiful. He reached for me, pulling me into his arms, and I felt something inside me finally let go of all that fear I'd been carrying. "I mean it, Vivian," he said against my hair, his voice thick with emotion. "I ain't going nowhere. I'm here for the long haul." We sat like that for a long time, holding each other, and for the first time since Ronald walked out, I felt like I could breathe again. When we finally pulled apart, Darius reached into his pocket and pulled out that simple gold band he tried to give me weeks ago. "Can I try this again?" he asked, his voice soft and hopeful. I laughed through my tears, holding out my left hand. "Yes, baby, yes." And when he slid that ring onto my finger, it felt right. It felt like coming home after a long, hard journey. But I knew saying yes was just the beginning. We'd have to tell Ronald, face his family, deal with the church gossip and the judgment and all the mess that was bound to come. But sitting there with Darius's hand in mine, feeling the weight of that ring on my finger, I realized something important. I was done living my life based on other people's rules. I'd spent 38 years trying to be the perfect wife, the perfect mother, the perfect church sister, and all it got me was a broken heart and a divorce. Now I was going to choose myself. I was going to choose love. I was going to choose Darius. And whatever came next, we face it together. "We going to have to tell Ronald," I said quietly, my voice steady even though my heart was racing. Darius nodded, his jaw tight. "I know, and it ain't going to be pretty. But I don't care, Vivian. You worth fighting for." I squeezed his hand, my heart full of something I hadn't felt in years. Hope. Real, genuine hope for a future that was finally mine. Chapter 8. Standing in our truth. Telling. Ronald was like walking through fire. Darius and I decided to do it together at a neutral spot, Otherland's Coffee on Cooper, where Ronald couldn't make too much of a scene without looking foolish. We got there early, both of us nervous, our hands clasped under the table like we were holding each other up. When Ronald walked in, his face was already set in that hard expression I knew too well. His shoulders tight with tension, he sat down across from us, his eyes moving between me and Darius like he was trying to solve a puzzle he didn't want the answer to. "This better be important," he said, his voice cold as January. I took a deep breath and said the words that needed saying. "Darius and I are together. We wanted you to hear it from us before you heard it from somebody else." Ronald went completely still, his hands flat on that coffee shop table, his jaw working like he was grinding his teeth to powder. "You joking," he said finally, his voice low and dangerous. "Tell me you joking right now, Vivian." Darius leaned forward, his voice calm but firm in that way he had. "We ain't joking, Ronald, and we ain't asking for your permission. We telling you out of respect because we still family." Ronald let out a bitter laugh that made people at other tables turn to look. "Respect? You want to talk about respect? You sleeping with my ex-wife, Darius, my ex-wife? Do you know how messed up that is? How stupid y'all look?" I cut in, my voice sharp. "I'm your ex-wife because you cheated on me, Ronald. Because you lied to me for years and made me feel like I wasn't enough. Darius was there when you wasn't. He saw me when you stopped looking. And I ain't gonna apologize for choosing somebody who actually loves me." The words hung in the air, and Ronald's face twisted into something ugly. "You think he loves you?" he said, pointing at Darius. "He been obsessed with you since I brought you home. He been wanting what I had from the very beginning. This ain't love, Vivian. This is him trying to prove something, and you too desperate and lonely to see it." Darius's hands clenched into fists on the table, but his voice stayed level. "You don't get to talk to her like that no more, Ronald. Not ever. Again." Ronald stood up so fast his chair scraped across the floor, drawing even more attention. "Y'all both dead to me," he said, his voice shaking with rage. "You hear me? Dead. And when this blows up in y'all faces, and it will, don't come crying to me." He stormed out of that coffee shop, and we sat there in the wreckage of what was left of the Jackson family. I felt tears trying to come, but I blinked them back, refusing to let Ronald take one more thing from me. The fallout came fast and ugly. Miss Dorothy called Darius and told him he wasn't welcome at family dinners no more, that he disgraced the Jackson name. Ronald's friends started spreading rumors that I'd been cheating during the marriage, that I'd seduced Darius while we were still together. Even some of the nurses I worked with at the nursing home started treating me different, whispering when I walked by, avoiding me during break time. It was exhausting and humiliating. And there were days I wanted to give up, to tell Darius it was too hard, that maybe we should walk away before it got worse. But every time I thought about ending it, Darius was right there, holding my hand, reminding me why we was fighting. He told me that love wasn't supposed to be easy, that anything worth having was worth fighting for. And slowly, I started to believe him again. One evening, after a particularly rough day at work, where one of the church mothers who volunteered at the nursing home made a comment loud enough for everybody to hear about women who don't know their place, I came home feeling defeated. But when I walked through my door, Darius was in my kitchen with all 4 grandbabies making spaghetti and meatballs. They were laughing about something. Little TJ had sauce all over his face, and Marcus was standing on a stool helping Darius stir the pot. The sight of them together, this makeshift family we was building, made my heart ache in the best way possible. Darius looked up and saw me standing in the doorway, and his smile was so full of love and warmth that I almost started crying right there. "Hey, beautiful," he said softly. "Rough day?" I nodded, kicking off my nursing shoes. "Yeah, but it's better now." And it was, because no matter what the world threw at us, no matter how many people judged us or talked about us or tried to tear us apart, we had this. We had each other. And that was more than enough. Chapter 9, Fighting for Forever. The hardest thing about loving Darius wasn't the judgment from strangers. It was the silence from people I thought would understand. My sister Lorraine stopped calling as much, and when we did talk, her voice was distant and careful. Some of my friends from Greater Faith Baptist stopped inviting me to the women's meetings, and the ones who did gave me these pitying looks that made me feel like a charity case. Even Sharon, my ride or die, had moments where she questioned if I was making the right choice. "I just want to make sure you ain't jumping into this because you lonely, Viv," she said one night on FaceTime. I felt the sting of those words, but I understood. Everybody was waiting for me to fail, waiting to say they told me so, and the weight of all those eyes, all that doubt, pressed down on me like I was carrying bricks on my back. But Darius never wavered, not once. He showed up every single day, even when people whispered about him at construction sites, even when his own family stopped speaking to him. He finished building that playhouse for the grandbabies like he promised, spent hours helping Marcus with his reading homework, made sure Jayla knew she was smart and beautiful, taught Kendra how to ride a bike, and rocked the baby TJ to sleep when he was fussy. And he made sure I knew I wasn't fighting this battle alone. One Saturday, he took me on a real date. No kids, no distractions, just us. We drove out to Shelby Farms and walked around the lake, the Tennessee sun warm on our faces, ducks swimming by, other couples walking hand in hand. At one of the benches overlooking the water, Darius pulled me close and said, "I know this is hard. Baby, I know people making it harder than it needs to be, but I need you to know I don't regret none of this. Not one second, and I never will." I looked up at him, the breeze blowing through my hair that was finally growing back healthy after years of stress, and I felt something inside me shift. I realized I'd been waiting for permission from Lorraine, from Miss Dorothy, from the church sisters, from the whole world to be happy. But standing there with Darius, looking out over that peaceful water, I realized I didn't need nobody's permission. I just needed to choose myself. I love you, Darius, I said, the words coming out before I could stop them. It was the first time I'd said it out loud since we got engaged, and the look on his face made my knees weak. I love you too, Vivian, he whispered, pulling me into a kiss that felt like sealing a promise. And in that moment, standing by that lake with the Memphis skyline in the distance, I finally felt free. Free from the shame, free from the fear, free from caring what anybody else thought. But freedom came with a price. Ronald filed a motion with the court trying to get custody of the grandbabies, claiming I was exposing them to an inappropriate relationship and that I was unfit to raise them. The court date was set for 3 weeks out, and I spent every night reading legal papers, terrified I might lose Jayla, Marcus, Kendra, and TJ. These babies were my whole world. I'd raised them since they were born. When my daughter couldn't get herself together, the thought of losing them made me sick to my stomach. Darius paid for a lawyer for me, a sharp sister named Monica, who didn't sugarcoat nothing. This is gonna be a fight, Miss Vivian, Monica said in our first meeting at her office downtown. Ronald gonna try to paint you as unstable, as somebody who cares more about her love life than her grandbabies. We need to be ready to fight back hard. I felt nauseated, but I nodded. I wasn't gonna let Ronald take my babies, not after everything I'd sacrificed, everything I'd survived to give them a stable home. The day of the custody hearing, I walked into that Shelby County courtroom with Darius by my side, my head held high, even though my hands were shaking so bad I had to clasp them together. Ronald was already there with his lawyer, his face smug and confident like he'd already won. But when Monica stood up and started dismantling Ronald's case, pulling out evidence of his years of cheating, his inconsistent child support payments, the fact that he'd barely been involved in these babies' lives until now, I saw that smugness start to crack. Monica called me to the stand, and I told my story with a steady voice, looking that judge right in the eye. I talked about the nights I stayed up with sick babies while working double shifts. I talked about the bills I paid by myself on a nursing assistant salary. I talked about how Darius had stepped up when Ronald walked away, how he loved these babies like they were his own. And when that judge finally ruled in my favor, keeping the custody arrangement exactly as it was, I felt something break open inside me. Relief and gratitude and the overwhelming realization that I'd won. Not just the case, but my whole life back. I'd fought for my babies, my future, and my right to love who I wanted, and I'd come out the other side stronger than I ever been. Chapter 10, Our New Beginning. How 8 months later, I was standing in my backyard watching Darius and Marcus put the finishing touches on that playhouse he'd promised. The Memphis sun was warm on my shoulders. My tomato plants were growing good in the garden Darius had helped me plant, and little TJ was toddling around the grass, chasing butterflies while Jayla and Kendra played hopscotch on the sidewalk. It was one of those perfect moments you don't realize you're living in until later, when you look back and see it for what it was, pure happiness. My phone buzzed in my apron pocket. It was a text from Sharon. "How married life treating you, Mrs. Jackson?" I smiled, looking down at the gold band on my finger. We'd gotten married 3 months ago at the courthouse. Just us, the 4 grandbabies, Sharon and a judge, who smiled the whole time. No big wedding, no drama, just a promise made in front of the people who mattered most. Life wasn't perfect. Ronald was still bitter, still refusing to be in the same room as Darius, still bad-mouthing us to anybody who would listen. Miss Dorothy had cut off contact completely and blocked both of us on Facebook. Some of my family members still whispered behind my back at holiday gatherings, and a few of the church sisters still looked at me sideways on Sundays. But I'd learned something important over this past year. I didn't need everybody's approval to live my life. I just needed my own. And I had Darius, who loved me with a steadiness that didn't quit, who showed up every single day, who chose me over and over again. I had these 4 beautiful grandbabies who were thriving in a home full of laughter instead of fighting. And I had myself stronger, braver, more whole than I'd ever been in my 58 years of living. Darius climbed down from that playhouse and walked over to me, pulling me into his arms without saying nothing. "What you thinking about, beautiful?" he asked, his voice soft against my ear. I leaned into him, my head resting on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "Just thinking about how different everything is now, how good it is." Darius kissed the top of my head, his arms tightening around me. "It's only gonna get better, Vivian, I promise you that." And I believed him. Not because our life was perfect, not because the road ahead would be easy, but because we'd already survived the worst. We'd fought for each other, for our family, for the right to love without shame, and we'd won. Jayla called out from the playhouse, "Grandma, Pawpaw Darius, come see." I laughed at her, calling him Pawpaw, pulling away from Darius to climb up the little ladder. Inside that wooden space, the girls had hung up fairy lights and spread out blankets, turning it into their own little hideaway. "It's perfect, baby girl," I said, my voice thick with emotion. And it truly was. That night, after all the grandbabies were tucked in bed, Jayla and Kendra in their room, Marcus and TJ in theirs, Darius and I sat on the back porch in the rocking chairs he'd built with his own hands. The Memphis night hummed around us with crickets and distant traffic. The jasmine I planted filling the air with sweetness. We didn't talk much, just sat in that comfortable silence that comes when two people know each other so deep. I thought about everything that had brought us here, the heartbreak, the judgment, the fear, the fighting. I thought about the woman I used to be, the one who stayed quiet, who made herself small, who believed she didn't deserve better than what Ronald gave her. And I thought about the woman I was now, the one who learned to stand up, to choose herself, to love without apologizing. "Thank you," I said suddenly, turning to Darius, "for not giving up on me, for seeing me when I couldn't see myself." Darius reached over and laced his fingers through mine, his thumb rubbing circles on my skin. "You don't gotta thank me for that, baby. Loving you's the easiest thing I ever done." And sitting there on that porch in the house we'd made into a home together, I realized something profound. I was happy. Not the fake kind of happy you put on for church on Sunday, but the deep, real kind that comes from knowing you survived the storm and came out stronger. I'd been broken, yes, shattered by a man who didn't deserve me, judged by people who didn't know my story, weighed down by a world that wanted me to stay small and quiet, but I'd put myself back together piece by piece. With the help of a man who loved me from a distance for almost 40 years and finally got the chance to love me up close. I'd fought for my grandbabies, for my future, for the right to live a life that was mine and nobody else's, and I'd won. The road ahead wouldn't always be smooth. There would be more judgment, more challenges, more moments when I'd question if I made the right choice. But sitting there with Darius's hand in mine, hearing my grandbaby's soft breathing through the window, I knew one thing for certain. I'd chosen love, and at 58 years old, after 38 years in a marriage that nearly killed my spirit, I'd finally chosen myself. And that was more than enough. It was everything. It was freedom. It was home.